Okay, we're on. Thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate that. As the literature has pointed out, and I want to go through these pages that were given to you. Give me a coffee, Barbara. I want to go through these pages with you from the beginning because they are important. First of all, a few notes about me. I certainly don't mind answering questions. If you have some things that you want to know more about me, that's fine. I just want to give you a little bit of my background for what I do and what I've done a little bit. The next page is very important. This page here, you can pull down into your computer, or I put them both on my Kindle as well as my computer. I have all of those books at my fingertips. Now, they're free, and they're provided for to do that. I don't know who did that, but they made that possible through digital recording of books. And so when you get it from that format, you're going to have a little bit of a problem with regard to the digitization makes mistakes and they replace some things once in a while. Well, but you'll get the hang of it, but you at least have a source for all of the material that Teilhard, most everything. When I first started looking at Teilhard, I was aware that a couple of books were important, and then I began to realize that there was a lot more material. And I thought at first there were 200 articles, essays, books in his collection. There are 500. So he was a busy writer. He had a lot of letters. He was always writing. So that's a very important thing that you, with the directions at the bottom of the page, you can pull those into your computer and you can have a little library of his material. The next set of material is some quotations from him. You can read those and enjoy that. They'll stimulate your thinking a little bit. You can get a lot of material on the internet. When I went to Amazon book search in Amazon, I put in the book search engine books, and then I put Teilhard. I had 100 pages of books come up, at about 10 to 12 pages of books a page. And so that tells you, I thought I was doing something that was really on the frontier. I found out I'm really a Johnny-come-lately. So to answer the question that was given to me before we turned the camera on, the overall aspect of what I see in this series is digging into and getting comfortable with the writer, the author, the mystic, the journalist, the visionary, the poet, Teilhard de Chardin, and then being able to see how that will apply to so many different aspects of daily living. And so let me give you this last part here. This is very important, this last section that says the chronological list of works. Because he wrote so many different things, and a lot of times they were essays and short kind of things, sometimes you're reading along in one of the books and you think, my goodness gracious, what are we going to do with this? How do we find it? Well, it just tells you, if you look carefully, you can find the name of the article in that section. It will give you the book it was printed in and also the date he wrote it. That becomes really important in dealing a study with Teilhard. A little bit of an introduction. I don't want to spend a lot of time with this, but a little introduction. I want to introduce Teilhard de Chardin to you. His full name is Pierre Joseph Marie Teilhard de Chardin, and actually, the de Chardin is his surname. That was his father's surname, but everybody knows him as Teilhard. If you always want to get to the internet and do things or study, you know, Chardin will get you a lot of things, but Teilhard is, and he often signed things out, Teilhard. So that's just how you find him. A little quick bit of information. He was born in 1881 near Avignon, France, and of course that would be a very Roman Catholic community. So he was born into that kind of an environment. Their practice in their family of 11, he was the fourth, was that the boys would be sent to a Jesuit boarding school somewhat near there when they were 11 or 12 years old. And so he went to that boarding school. He got excited about the Jesuits. He entered their community and became a Jesuit priest himself. After going through a number of things, and during that early years, he was sent to Egypt, where he taught physics and chemistry for 3 years in Egypt. That was part of his training for the Jesuits. And then he came back, and they kicked him out of France, the whole Jesuit community, and they were doing that to all the religious communities in France in that time. And so he wound up in England with his community. All of that becomes important because in his life there are two things that really governed his development. His father was a scientist, and so he picked up and became very interested in the science of geology, and then later in life that would develop and focus almost entirely on anthropology. And he also had a mother who was not just a Catholic, but she was a really deep, what I would call a mystical gal, who really took on her Catholicism seriously and had a deep personal experience with her religion and with the person of divinity. So that two parts of him becomes very important all through his life. A very important brief thing, don't want to get too far in it, but in 1914 he was drafted into the French army. Now he was already a Catholic priest, so they wanted him to be a chaplain in the army with the rank of a captain. And he said, I won't do it. And I said, why not? He said, I want to be with the men, and I'm not going to negotiate about that. So they said, well, they looked around, and they didn't have too much to offer him, so they made a stretcher bearer out of him. Now that was the dirtiest, lowest job in the trenches. It was the bottom of the social climate there. And he was with the French army in that capacity for all the rest of the war. And this is a very important thing to understand. And briefly, the first time I saw this, I was amazed by it. He would go back to back behind the front line and get some rest and clean up and that sort of thing, and he couldn't wait to get back in the trenches. And I saw that, and I thought, got a screw loose or something? What's the matter with you, fella? But it turned out he had 2 or 3 things that he said that were very important. He wrote an article about it, but the summary. He said, first of all, when I go back to the trenches, I can't take anything with me. I've got to throw it off. You know, anything I'm dealing with family, anything going on with this or that, and even a lot of the things you might have carried, he just took the bare necessities to the trenches. And he said, I never felt more free in my life. That was really amazing. He didn't have any of those distractions. When he got in the trenches, what he found was this: 1 million men butting heads and trying to kill each other. And it was a grim situation. And if you know anything about that warfare, it really was bad. But what he found was that was a compression of human beings that raised energy within the spirit of human beings by being compressed together. Now he would spend a lot of time on this, but he said in those years there will be a very large rise in consciousness in humankind around the globe because of this war. And if you take the First World War and the Second World War and see them as one event and look at that compression, think about the change in society and the rise in consciousness in Europe. Completely broke down the old structures. There would never be a European Union and a common ground among all those people if it hadn't been for that. Look at the change that occurred in Russia and the rise of consciousness. I got distracted a little bit, but it still was true. And my goodness, it spread over to Japan and then China and Indochina. You start looking at this and you say, wow, he was right. A huge rise of consciousness. So, in the trench, in that compressed psychic energy place, he fed on it. He could go down there and it just excited and gave him tremendous energy to work and grow in ideas. You'll find almost all of his ideas seeded and began in that 5 years. After the war was over, he wanted to get back in teaching and so on. He was really good at a lot of things, and by that time he had a book ready called, in 1924, he had a manuscript ready called The Divine Milieu. It got in the hands of the religious leadership, both in his congregation and in Rome, and they said, you may not print it. They gave him no permission to print it, and they were so nervous about the guy by 24 that when he was offered a job to go on a scientific journey to China to do some work in geology, they were really happy to send him. They wanted him out of the way. And so he wound up spending in his life 25 years in China. He was highly responsible for the development of the Peking man, and he set the course for geology and anthropology in China in their studies, and he was recognized by somebody as far up as Mao Tse-tung, who saw his value and was glad he was around, and they raised him up to be the international consultant for the earth sciences in China. He came back from all of that. He was offered a chair position in Paris. He had an international recognition and deep agreement or liked him a lot in his science. So he really had that part of his life was extremely developed and very well recognized. From the time on, then as he goes through all these scientific things, his continuing developing his writing, he will come to a point where in the Second World War, he got trapped because he went over to China in 37, I think it was, and but by 39, he realized he wasn't getting out because of he couldn't go to France because it was overtaken, and he couldn't travel much because of the U-boats and stuff like that. And so consequently, he wound up spending all the Second World War in what is now Beijing. He didn't have opportunity to go out on the field to do his fossil work because he wouldn't let him do that because of the unrest there. So he wound up, one thing he did was he finished an overhaul to his major work called The Phenomenon of Man. And I appreciate this gentleman who brought us a copy of this book. Now, we're going to tell you right now, don't buy it, ever, okay? Because since then, a new book called The Human Phenomenon, which is the same work, has been put out. The difference between the book is they didn't have nearly the resource at the time, and the lady that did this had tremendous resource to look at all his material and get it coordinated and everything else. So this has come as a very good and rich book that has got a lot of improvement in its translation, actual translation, and also in the accuracy of the material and getting a lot of details in it. I've told, there's one chair over there and one back there, okay? And I've told people that this book, just for the Brian Swin preface and for the editor's notes and what she put together in telling you how the book got written and what it was all about, is worth the cost of the book. This is an excellent piece of work. So that work in 47, he overhauled it, and again he was denied opportunity to print it. They didn't allow it. He never had a book printed in his lifetime, as it turned out, because of their resistance. That's changed. Today, the Pope before and the one now, and they're encouraging people to be looking at him and reading him. They're still having trouble with his thoughts and what he's saying, but they're trying to get that integrated, and so finally that's improving. So then he came back when the war was over. He still had some traveling to do. He got to France. Again, they kind of shoved him out and said, go away. And he was really kicked out of France. So he did some work in the field of his science, but he settled in America. And there are a number of reasons that brought him here. And that was about 1950, 49, 50 that he made that his home in New York City. He actually came through Colorado a couple of times, and when I've been able to check his movements. And he died in 1955 in New York City. And so within 2 or 3 years, there were a lot of books over several different languages in the world. They moved very quickly and some bestsellers immediately. So his material began to be popular and got out. So that's a little bit of him. Since then, I thought I was in a cutting edge of doing this and getting people to know about Teilhard, because I didn't know that much. And I also met a lot of people that didn't know anything. It turned out that as I did this work and as I've done what I'm doing now, I'm a Johnny-come-lately. I mean, there's a huge interest in him around the globe. We'll move on to a topic with him very soon. One comment: I think he's so important that history will show that he will be more influential for the culture and the real society of the world, not just of Europe or America, but a lot broader than that, than Galileo ever was. He may be the most important man that we've had writing and giving us visionary thinking and pushing us to new dimensions, maybe for 400 or 500 years. He is awesome. Now, a little bit about how to get to him, and a couple of comments that will help us work together better at it. First of all, when you read him, I don't recommend you start with the human phenomenon. Okay, he's scientific about that first part, and he'll just kind of drive you a little crazy. And he uses a lot of words that he makes up, because when he didn't have one, he just made one up. There's a dictionary for Teilhard de Chardin out there. The silly thing was listed at $79. I didn't get one. But I've been trying to digest what all he said ever since. What I found is, and what I'm going to give you a couple quick recommendations if you want to follow him and get to know him. This is the most important book you can begin with. This is called The Spirit of Fire. And The Spirit of Fire is very important because it's written by Ursula King. But who's Ursula King? In 1962, she was getting a degree, process of getting her degree in Paris, and a Jesuit priest did a series on him. She got so excited about it, she dedicated her first degree, her master's, and her doctorate to these kinds of topics. She is a fabulous scholar. And this book, and she really digested and worked in his material for 50 years. So she was really well understood what he was saying and able to articulate. So the book is a bibliography combined with the fact that she mentions and gives detail to his major themes as she goes along, with a lot of quotes from him. So by reading the book, you get a really good introduction to him, his person. His life is important to his literature, so I think it's a very good read. And then from there, you'll find a lot of indications to articles that you'll want to chase down or work on, or other books that have been put together. And that list of books I gave you, with that combined, really gives you a tremendous source. She wrote that in 1995, Ursula King did. She wrote a second book she called Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and then Writings Selected with Introduction by Ursula King. She took 4 topics and then put his work together in those 4 topics from different sources. It's an excellent introduction also to him. When you get the next, one of the very best books to get a hold of to understand him is his own work, is The Heart of Matter. Now, The Heart of Matter the reason this is so important is that in 1950 he wrote The Heart of Matter. It takes up about 80 pages in that book. And what he's doing is he's trying to give a little biographical history of himself, plus talking about his primary themes as he came upon them, as they worked out in his life. And so it's a really good summary and a really good article. Then the articles behind it are related to it, and they come from different times in his life. The editors did a good job of that. That is a very good book. Your list of the chronological list that you have in your hands, that comes from that book with permission. I got the permission to give that out like so I really recommend those are some things to do that will get you going. One other comment: if you'll go to, I use Google search, Google Teilhard YouTube, you will pull up about, I don't know, I didn't count them, maybe a dozen different presentations in a video format of people talking about Teilhard, and there's some really good material in there. Ursula King does 2 different programs, each an hour long. They are superlative. She's a scholar. She's not someone like me popularizing or trying to get people's interest in it. One, she's speaking very clearly from a well-educated scholarly position. Marvelous lady. And so there's good material available. Enough said. Any questions about that? Just that lingering here that are cutting off your ability to listen. You know, children, they have an automatic switch. Their hand goes up, little switch in there, and the ears go off. So with adults, it's a little bit more subtle.
You say died in 1955. Are there any videos of him?
None that I know of. They're doing it's in progress, and it's been in progress now for a couple of years. They're preparing, I think it's going to be a 2-disc DVD on his life and so on that should come out fairly soon. What I found out was there's a large, like the American Teilhard Association. There's one like that in France and I believe Germany and Russia and just all over the place. Italy's got one, I believe, too. Lots of critical interest in him. So, any other questions that linger? Okay, let us move over to a topic. I chose to invite you to come so that I could get your attention, and some of you needed that, to try to solve or try to look at the problem of evolution and creationism. Now, a lot of people don't even care about that, don't have any sense of it being a problem. But if you're on a lot of college campuses, or even high school students, this is really bothering them. And the reason is, it goes right back to the very beginnings of the issue, which lie with Darwin. So, what I want to do is talk a little bit, and on this part here, if you have a question or thought as we're going along, I don't mind an interruption. What I don't want to do is I don't have any need to get in an argument about it, so I'm not going to defend anything in one sense. But what I'm going to try to do is put some information out here that will dissolve the issue and show you that it's really a false argument or a false problem that's going on. And I'll show you why the arguments are in place and what the difficulty is. So when we go back to Darwin and we begin there, you have to understand something about science. I put on the board here a little comment that said inside outside. And what the point is this: all science for 500 years, and then really in its development to where it really became a scientific method and so on, which really occurs only 200 or 300 years back, and gets going, started back then, but then more so, and then really got underway in the 1800s, 17, 1800s, and then into the 1900s. Science was about the outside of things. Okay, what do I mean by that? It's what you could measure. It's what you could weigh. It's what you could put your hands on. It's what is on the outside of the discussion of any topic in science you want to talk about. Darwin was very much a scientist of the outside and the outside of things. And so that puts a limitation that's quite problematic. And no one could see that as being particularly an issue. And meanwhile, what was going on was there was science over here, and there was religion over here, and church groups over here, and they then fought as to who had the right to define the truth of what this thing was all about or not all about. And they had a lot of battles all along through all those years. I know for me, when I was in seminary, I had no idea how much my training in the scholarly part of my program, not in the religious development or so on so much, but in the scholarly and the intellectual part of things, was all on the outside. And so Chardin comes along, and I'll try to give you a little quick picture of how he got there. He had as a 6-year-old, this little tyke was interested in something that was permanent and was trustable. Absolutely called it. So he went around looking for it, and he found some stones that worked pretty good, but then they broke up or they could be lost, and then he had another one. But he found a piece of iron, and he thought he had it. So boy, that became his iron, and he had a couple places where he had a couple different pieces that were that. He got a little older, and he found out it rusted, and you could cut it. And he thought, oh man, that's not so dependable, it's not so permanent at all. So now he's getting a little more education, he's getting developed up, he's gone from being involved in just the earth science of geology and so on. He's now touching into life and living. And he's still got this interest now that geology pushed him into what was going on back when, a long time ago. And so that was all growing together. And as he did that, he really thought he had found his item that was going to hold everything together. Now, that was life. Got a little older, and that got disappointing too, because he began to see the change of life and the death of life. And so it wasn't working. And he had this driving sense there had to be something at center, something that at center would hold it all together and not let that dissipate out. A little side note: if you take what Darwin said and the sciences of that time said and follow them out to their goal, their end, you just take and push it out there, you wind up at entropy. Nothing moving, complete loss of energy, and no future. And by the way, that drives a lot of social structures in our world today, because that's where the apocalypse kind of thing in religion comes from too, is that it's that kind of entropy that is based upon a scientific notion that when a project thing uses up all its energy, it becomes immobile and lifeless. Teilhard could never see that. He never could, but so he looking for it. Life wasn't it. He finally realized what the ingredient was spirit. Now, at that point, at life he was still in the age of science, and you could test and work on it, and you could look at it from the outside. But at the spirit point, he started looking at life, at matter, and all of life and everything on the inside. So what's the inside? The inside is spirit. The inside gets into consciousness. The inside gets into morality. The inside gets into intellection, will. Those are all inside items. And so then that began when he makes that leap, and he then begins to connect that inside aspect to his evolutionary sense that was very strong. He then walks completely past the evolutionary doctrine of Darwin. Completely changes it. So that's what we're going to be looking at, is some of that kind of thing. And the inside-outside is really important. There is one thing, and I want to give you a little treat by way of just give you some of Teilhard's words. So what I chose to highlight here was, in order to understand Teilhard and understand what he's trying to say, he says in his book on the human phenomenon, he has a preface of his own, and it's on seeing. And this is what he's got to say about seeing, and some of the things he says about seeing. Seeing we might say that the whole of life lies in that bird. That's a nice little heavy statement. At least essentially, and fuller being is closer to union. And union increases only through an increase in consciousness. Now, this is typical Chardin, he's only got 2 sentences in there. He's got about 5 different thoughts going at you, and they're really particular and they're very important. So he's saying, if you want to be important to what's going on, you got to learn to see. And he says to a scientist, he says, if you don't have the gift of seeing at a much deeper level, you can't really do authentic research in science. That's an interesting comment that he made. But I really believe he's correct about that. Now, this kind of seeing that he's talking about comes out of his mystical background with his mother, and comes out of his own mystical life that he lived. And so now we're talking about seeing in a whole lot of different ways. And he'll use this concept of seeing as he looks at evolution. He'll go back and see, as it were, each of the steps of evolution, and therefore then the mechanisms. He goes on to say, to see or to perish is the key condition laid upon everything that makes up the universe, by reason of the mysterious gift of existence. And this is, in superior nature, is man's condition. Man has the opportunity and the necessity of seeing. Yes?
Bishop, do you have different ideas than we do?
You don't have this, but it's in the book, and I can, it's available, but no, you don't have a copy of this in your hands. Now, man has a double title as the twofold center of the world to impose on himself an effort to see. He's got really double reasons why he needs to see, and it's the key to the universe. I'm just selecting a few of his comments in this thing. I'm not reading a whole bunch. Scientists, when they reach the end of analysis, they cannot tell with any certainty whether the structure they've reached is the essence of the matter they are studying or the reflection of their own thoughts. Are you aware of quantum mechanics that are telling us that the observer changes the observed?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he's basically said. Here he's saying it in his little poetic way, but he's already way ahead of the quantum mechanic people, and that's the way he is. He speaks things out that just outrun everybody. And so that little comment, yeah.
Do you think he also means in seeing, like what the Greeks said, speak so I may see you?
Speak so that I may see you. Does he mean that? Yes, this gets into when we start trying to see through these things. The thing I start looking at or recognizing is the fact of the relationship of my words to who I am. And my words are formed across my ideas, which are formed across my education, but even more so formed on my own intuition too, and my own encounter with truth. See, a little side note. When I grew up, I had a problem, and I didn't know what it was until much later. I didn't get along too good with a lot of education things. Now, factually, when I graduated from high school, I managed to get out second in my class, which was pretty good. But I got over into seminary, and my goodness gracious, it was languages and Latin, and we were trying to get some Spanish going, and it was the beginnings of what would become philosophy and history. But it was all, and I fought hard to get C's in seminary. I finally figured out something years afterwards, that I'm basically intuitive more than I am deductive and logical. And you women had the privilege of saying that was you, and I was told I was out of line when I did that. You're not supposed to be like that. I could go further with that statement. Now, but the point is, that was a problem. And so for me, that's one reason why I think I felt to really enjoy Teilhard, because I can feel his mysticism, his tendency to be on that side of the intuitional kind of thing, and so So I'm kind of able to say, then when I look at that, I say, yeah, a question like that, see, I don't want to give a great logical answer exactly what, I'm telling you what I think was going on with him, is he definitely was a whole person in that sense. Now, he will say out of that problem of seeing the difference between the outside and inside, he'll say to all of science and all of religion, the only thing that makes sense is when they're done as one. He says when you look at matter and you look at its outside characteristics, is you can measure. So you can measure the size of this podium and you can check its weight and you can do all that. He said that's one aspect of it. But there's a second aspect of this podium, and it's on the inside. Now let me show you how that boils down to what it says about this podium. It says that in this podium there's spirit, a touch of spirit in everything created. And in the podium, if there's a touch of spirit, there's consciousness. Now, at the point of matter and consciousness, it's pretty dispersed and thin. But as it comes together in evolution, then it will build up to where we become at the other end of it, self-reflective. And that's all the process of the coming together of the things that are in the depth of the wholeness of matter. Now, one side step then to Teilhard at this point is to talk a little bit about pantheism. If he lived here in Estes Park, and I got these pictures up here on the screen for you to just give you some picture ideas of the kind of way he saw things in beautiful fashion and extensively through the universe, not just the world. But if he lived here, he would find himself oftentimes sitting on a porch looking over at one of our mountains and would get so intensely into it that he would find that he was spaced out in it, in a modern language, I guess you could say, out of his body almost into this view of this mountain, and pretty soon he'd move from there. And that's it's even the mystical side of things, looking at that mountain. But then he would move to there, to adoration. Now, at that point, the early readers of religious people who didn't understand Teilhard, didn't read all his work, thought at that point that he was really in danger of becoming a pantheist in a bad negative sense to them. It's not true. They didn't read enough of it. Because when he did that, he was coming in touch with divinity. Because he saw spirit and divinity in everything. And I'm telling you, this guy turns heads when you finally get a hold of him about how you feel about this world. Because if you really touch into the spirit of the truth in all of matter, you're going to be an ecologist and environmentalist that's going to care about what we're doing to our natural resources. You're going to care about life. You know, that whole battle going on over shooting the gorilla at the little zoo that had that boy get in his hands. That's been it's been a talk show argument of major nature, and people are really calling in with passion and conviction on that argument. What's going on? There's a rise in consciousness that has come up hugely in my lifetime in regard to life and other things besides human. I mean, look at the interest and the willingness to put their life on the line to preserve whales. I mean, people out there letting the boats run over the top of them practically, trying to get them to stop from taking that out of our lives. And you just go down the line, all these different things. And now, so we're beginning to see how we're changing. There's a lot more interest in making sure that we're using our resources with thoughtfulness to the whole picture. We wouldn't be doing recyclables if it weren't that sense of consciousness coming up. And we do that. We're invited and we're told to do that. So they become important things. So in the evolutionary aspect then, if you take Darwin's idea on the outside of the survival of the fittest what he called natural selection, which is really an arbitrary kind of just happens and kind of thing, and so on. And I don't have time to give it to you in exact detail, but when Chardin goes through that, he comes to the very clear conclusion that leads to a point of entropy, when there's no more activity in life, is gone from everything. Chardin says, no, that's not true, because you see, when you have spirit moving in things, you have the spirit by its nature is pulling on the development of evolution with design. So, instead of having a haphazard kind of thing and a survival of the fittest, you've got a design that is setting up the stages, as it were. Now, Chardin allows for a major amount of tests and trials that fails and doesn't work in evolutionary processes. And that's very, very important. And this becomes one of the most argumentable places, and one of the places he ran into trouble with the Catholic hierarchy was that then indicated a different view of the first few chapters of Genesis. Because all of a sudden, he says, evolutionary-wise, it is impossible to have a single man and a single woman figure out how we got to where we are today. He said, in evolution, there's no such thing as a single event like that. It's always a crowd.
Yes.
So, I have a piece of paper over here someplace that talks about that crowd. I don't know if I'm going to find it. Oh, it's right here. At the bottom. Anyway, must be over there.
No, it's on that.
Okay. Anyway, I'm going to talk about this problem from a very simple kind of view. And it is simply this. They did a DNA study on this guy called Percy in Alabama, and they found out that he just pushed human beginnings back to 400 million years ago. That was that one DNA find. That's what science is saying. Now, they were already talking about our beginnings at 150, 170 million years ago, but this science, this DNA, was of a sort that it broke off the line completely and begins to reveal multiple filaments or multiple channels of humanoids coming and intermarrying or intermarrying or anyway, making little ones. and so we're doing a whole new search or idea about the thing. And so what Teilhard was saying, it doesn't come in a single person, it comes in a crowd. That evolutionary process always goes forward. It takes a crowd. Now, when you begin to understand that, and the reason that the Catholic hierarchy and a whole lot of other Christians got upset was, this brought up a huge problem of evolution. The evolutionary concept was then challenging their whole attitude about Adam and Eve in the garden, and also about original sin, which is a little bit different subject than what I'm on today. I'm more on looking at the overall picture, but that's what happened. And when they did that, they just went wild and said, you can't deny all that, you're out of here. You don't know what you're talking about, you're crazy. And he said, no, I got it right. You just have to grow up, that's all. And so he wouldn't budge on what he had, and he wouldn't fight him. He was never ugly and about it. He was always kindly and non-judgmental. So he kept his grace in the situation, but he was clearly not going to budge on his insights that he was developing. So in the process, then in evolution, all of these matters come into the fight. So when you get into creationism today, against evolution over here, the creationists today are saying that you have a major event of creation. And in that word, it would be proper to say, God created. Okay? That would be correct. But the problem you get into, the moment you say that, you have set up a dualism between God who created and what's made over here, and the timetables go all crazy. Because you're then saying that there are points of particular creation, so that every time that something new happened along the way, there had to be a new, brand new created moment occur. Well, when you start trying to piece this together and you see how this happens in a multitude, in a slower process and so on, it loses all of its beauty and all of its meaning. It gets really difficult to defend that. But that's what intellectual design, that's the problem they're talking about. Is that intellectual design is into a form of static creation. But what did Darwin start off at when he got his work going? What was one of the main problems? He began to show us that all of time and space were in motion instead of statically like this. And of course, the first breakout of that was Galileo, who said we're not the center. You know, and so that was a break, but evolution comes along, a much stronger statement of it being in motion. And Einstein comes along and says, absolutely, folks. And he started giving us theories and ideas that just blow our mind at time and motion and bending of things and the universe that warps, and we had to really recalculate everything. But in terms of evolution then, when you come with what Teilhard is saying about evolution, then he destroys the kind of intelligent design that's in static way. And when I began to look through this, I've got to understand, I'm trained precisely for a long time in my life in that static concept that was right out of scholasticism of the Middle Ages and so on. I mean, that's what we studied, that's what we were rooted on, and they went back to Greek concepts that Aristotle gave us, and so all this stuff was in place. So when you come along, and I didn't have any trouble with thinking in terms of evolution, because I had another way of saying it. I said, well, let's say that God wanted to create a refrigerator. Okay, so there's one there, made one. But let's suppose that this refrigerator had the ability to turn itself on, and it could wind up being a computer because of all the processes it could put itself through. I said that would be even more intelligent, even more great about God than just making one. And see, that's what I was already beginning to think a little bit about evolutionary things. That's a whole lot different when you begin to see the flow of life, and divinity's in the middle of that anyway. So when you get into Chardin, now, if we're going to have a discussion from the point of view of atheism, with no belief in God at all, and no belief in God as a participant in creation, I'm not going to have much of a class with you if you're going to hold that position, because I'm not there. Chardin's not there. Chardin is very clearly present and saying that in all of creation God is totally present. So for me, I never use this word anymore that God created. God is creating. This podium is being created right now. It's in the flow and it's in the process of that, or it wouldn't be here. The only thing that can exist is when there is a participation of the created and the divine together, and that's where spirit comes in. But you see, as soon as you say that, you destroy all of the nonsense about the problem of evolution and God. Evolution and creationism. It is non-existent because you have divinity in the flow of everything completely. Now you have to do a little bit of rethinking about your theology. A little bit at this point.
At this point, to take that leap to say something about the spirit that exists in that dead wood is real difficult. for me to do
Okay,
at this time.
for anybody that has trained anybody trained in a way that was the way we all were trained back when, and has held that, and particularly people who've got a good science foundation, to see spirit in every bit of creation, every particle of creation, is difficult. I can understand that. However, I cannot understand that being not true, and let me put it to you this way. Teilhard de Chardin saw that if you're going to look at this moment that we're in, where we are, and what are we? I'm a reflective human being. What does that reflective human being mean? I'm self-reflective. I've got a consciousness. I'm conscious, but I'm self-conscious. That's what makes me different than the primates, is